I don't know if do you have a Twitter feed? You need to get one, because the thing is, if you don't, I can tell. The thing is, what you're saying, there's a lot of ripe, like one-liners that make me want to learn more. And if you can make something compelling about the mundane, which I think you're onto, I mean, yes, I'm excited to see what the content. I don't know what the content is either, like from that pitch. But I would be teased into finding out a lot more if I was getting a daily tweet of like some very fascinating, interesting take on the mundane.
Yeah, and I would just add that I loved your delivery, and it really does point to that you've got to perform. Yeah. And I would just, you know, again, in like different genres, invite different aspects of craft. So your tendency to digress is fantastic when you can deliver it with a different tone and with a little aside outside of your mouth, yes. And it's a problem in the pitch. Yes. So just think about like, okay, if I'm going into this kind of venue, I'm going to do that. All right?
Great, thank you.
All right, next up is Quincy.
Hi, Quincy Lair, how are you? So, Heimat, which means homeland in German, is a book-length poetic sequence that takes its cues from sources ranging from the great modernist long poems of the 20th century to the Asterix comic books to the city of New York itself, with the occasional dick joke thrown in. Exploring what it means to belong to the American nation, to wit, quote, employer versus peon, the dictator versus the democrat, the owned, the rental, the family left behind. But that's for later. Well, given that I can only quote briefly, the later is that at the heart of the poem is the journey of Ernst Lehr, my German-speaking great-grandfather, who abandoned his family and the Lutheran ministry at the beginning of World War I to join the American military. He never returned, and his ultimate whereabouts are unknown. That was not meant as a laugh line. Heimat is not a typical poetry manuscript. It is a kind of, and therein lies its imaginative power. In the words of the poem itself, quote, "This is not an exercise in her escape. A lukewarm song that thinks it's hot. A family gap that's caught on tape. No, this is a twisted monolith. A sculpture set in troubling lines, a sneering reference to a myth. A Flanders field that's strewn with mines." With criticism of poetry in the mainstream press often bemoaning a lack of political engagement and a tendency towards solipsistic narrative, note a recent article in Harper's, this book should stand out as different without being particularly forbidden. This would also, by the way, be my fourth. The book is structured by an awareness of time and our relation to events past and present, both historical and literary. The poem, which has had excerpts published widely, uses a mix of rhymed and metered verse and free verse. And while the allusions are frequent, they do not require a PhD in archaeology or fluency in multiple languages to decipher, title notwithstanding. It has the potential to appeal not only to a poetry audience, but also to draw in those interested in our place in history. Who we are, where we have been, and where we might be going. As well as perhaps other more general readers who often find contemporary poetry inward-turned and inaccessible.
Thank you.
Asking poetry in Word.
Way up to the poet expert. I thought it was really quite good. Really good.
And I think what I would advise you, okay, the phrase, "therein lies its imaginative power." Strike it, strike it, strike it. Anything where you're tuning your own horn like that, it actually sounds a little stilted. Therein lies, the fears, the sort of forbidding sense that editors, agents are going to have with anything that's poetic is this is too intimidating, this is, most poets don't have agents. I mean, they're
Virtually not.
Yeah, there's one guy, Rob McQuilkin. Do you know Rob McQuilkin? He's an agent. He used to be an editor. Do you know him? Who represents Natasha Trethewey. He actually does do a bunch of poets, and it's cool that agents are starting to represent poets. But it's not something that most that most agents would even look at because they don't do poetry. But you do a good job of making it seem relevant and compelling, and I think it's your grandfather's story. It's very interesting, and I like that. I kind of would have wanted that a little bit earlier. I thought the first sentence was great until you said the thing about the dick jokes. It is funny, but you're going to turn off so many agents with that you don't really want that in there. And that could go later.
And you can have juxtaposition
Yes.
with so many other words.
Exactly.
And I like that he has an instinct to defray the high seriousness of
But he had
poetry.
already done that with the asterisk reference,
Okay.
so it was too much.
Yeah.
I loved it, the asterisk juxtaposition with the great long poems, and I love that. Ooh, that's so good. And I was like, ooh, why add this third term? It's kind of confusing me, and it seemed cutesy, and it seemed too obvious to me. I would also talk about other books, recent books. I liked it when you mentioned the Harper's article, showing that you're versed in like what's going on now. Have you read My Poets by Marie McLean?
I have.
I reviewed it for the Chicago Tribune, and it's a great book, and I would mention it because it got a lot of, she's a poetry professor, she's a PhD, but she wrote this memoir where it's sort of like hybrid literary criticism and memoir published by FSG.
Right.
That is something that I would mention, the success of another book like yours. I would also, what's that book, Golden Gate, that was published on?
Be From Seth. That was back in the 80s.
Yeah, mention it though, mention it.
I mean, that's a bit more, that's a novel in verse, which is a slightly different thing. I mean, you can mention that, you can mention John Gardner, I suppose, too.
But just to show that there have been mainstream books that, that's what I want you to do, because otherwise we'll have people say this sounds nice, but go to the poetry genre.
Right.
You know?
Call me anal, but I'm curious about word count. I can't figure out the scope of this, how long it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yes.
And so my mind didn't fully wrap around it, although I did find the pitch compelling, and it's obviously a deeply felt narrative that captures a family saga in interesting, obviously novel, if not poetic ways. But those details, and frankly, if you have published before, just the platform thing that is so, important to understanding an author's whereabouts in a way.
Yes.
Right.
Where have you published? Is it interesting to us? Does it help us wrap our heads around your accomplishments, separate from what you're pitching to us? Not irrelevant here. In a category that's hard to publish in generally.
Yes.
So, but I was willing to roll with you, and that says a lot.
Liz, do you want to chime in something?
Yeah, this is so beyond anything that, I know in my world. Do you have a Twitter feed?
I'm on Instagram.
Well, that is a really, if you can find a way to visually get across your words, I mean, that would be brilliant. I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I didn't really I got more of the meat of it towards the end. I think some of the you're a great performer, and I think you can develop that, but I think some of the language does get in your own way a little bit in terms of clarity. But there's still a place for it, you know what I mean?
And I wanted to say, first of all, I thought that I'm going to defer to Priscilla because she gave you such good poetry comments. But I would say that you want to think about your delivery, because I think that you clearly present as this. I'm not your fuddy-duddy poet, okay? And I like that. But when you presented, you said you got confusion from the audience, like that wasn't meant to be a laugh line. Like you have a very stylized way of presenting. And I want to make sure that you are clear of how you're using your body and the way you present that jives with the language of the poetry. And I feel like you were actually after something that was irreverent and fun, but actually had some deep seriousness to it. And to me, I found your style, and look, it's all subjective, take it with, but I feel like you are potentially alienating some people that could be really seduced by what you have.
I agree completely with you on that, and I think you should pitch in writing, not with your body, not with your person. I think the writing was really good as I listened to the writing, but when I looked at you and the way you turn your head and do these things, it does make it seem gimmicky, and it isn't gimmicky, it doesn't need that.
You're more serious than your presentation.
Yes.
So just consider it. You may hate us for saying it, but we really mean you well.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to skip to Kelvin. And if Carol is coming late, just somehow communicate, because I can't see. All right, Kelvin.
Hi, my name is Kelvin Ortega, first-time pitcher, long-time talker. Today I'll be pitching an idea I have for a 60-page graphic novel, although it could also work as a book. The universe the story takes place in has a technological level similar to that of ancient Greece. Like the Greeks, these people are also polytheistic. Here the gods have the forms of the four basic elements: air, earth, water, and fire. Their priests believe that the gods grant them the powers over the elements and the ability to summon elemental avatars in return for their devotion. The reality is that when they enter into this communion, their souls are forever bound to the elemental plane. Once they die, they become the very elementals that they summon in life. Stone was one of these priests. Here's a small excerpt from Elementary Differences, a working title. Completely enveloped in darkness, Stone wallows in his own misery, completely subsumed in both the earth and his own woes. Darkness, he thinks, as he touches his face, a stranger to him as it is no longer what it once was. It is all I know now. He runs his fingers over the place where his mouth once was, disturbed by the sound of softly grinding rock that they now make. The absence of the features that were once such a basic part of his life for so long, his other life, plunges him back into the abyss of his own inner demons. All I know is absence, the absence of light, the absence of warmth, the absence of her. These thoughts get him thinking of Eris again. The old pain fills him then, dull and aching in his chest. I wish that the darkness were truly empty, but even here I am haunted by a life that is no longer mine. Had Stone not been so focused on his own problems, perhaps he would have noticed that there was a small light piercing the darkness, like the flame of a single candle off in the distance. The light grows closer as Stone continues to bemoan the things that he had so long taken for granted in his own life. To still remember the sky and the sea, to never forget her face, her name, Ariels. Stone's living monolith of the body is now revealed in the small light that comes from the traveling orange flame as it approaches. To think these thoughts as eternity stretches on is the last thought Stone has before a voice booms in his mind. Thank you.
I mean, I think overall it was a very good pitch. It was it was clear. It was like kind of to the point. If anything that was missing, it would be a little bit more of you as your personality.
What was missing for me was the images. You said it was a graphic novel, and I didn't understand when you started reading. I just tuned out. I was like, I can't judge as an agent. There is an agent at Janko Nesbitt who does graphic novels, and I know that you can't judge the text without the images if you're looking to represent a graphic novel. So at that point, when you didn't hold anything up, I just checked out.
To be fair, I think he asked about projection, but I should have said.
I'm not an artist.
Yeah.
I can't draw.
So
you're just writing the text. You need.
I'm writing the text. I need an artist.
That's
also,
crucial to say.
and I should have said that.
crucial to say. Crucial
Also,
to say.
the original text is written with the directions of what's to be in each panel, but pitching that I felt was a little dry. If I'm just sitting here, panel 1, off center, darkness, only
that would
eyes.
have been okay. I would have done that.
I would have done that. Yes.
All right, so that's a lesson.
But the most important thing is from the very outset to say it doesn't yet have illustrations.
Got it.
That I've written the text of what could be, and you also said a 60-page graphic novel, although it could also work as a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand that because a graphic novel is a book. So
That is in no imagery.
Yeah, that's the kind of language that an agent will look and think, oh, this person doesn't really know what they're talking about, and it's just so simple to just say a 60-page graphic novel. You don't need to say anything else, and I've written the text, and I'd like to be matched with an illustrator. Because it's actually a big issue with people who come, especially for children's books. Usually now they like people to come not with an illustrator attached, because publishers like to match people up with illustrators, so you definitely want to show that you're flexible and open to somebody else being able to come on board with you.
And I want to hear what the agents say about this. I always think when somebody says working title, it's undermining. Like, it's clear that you're going out and pitching with the best you got. If you introduce, like, this is a working title, I can be anything you want to be, to me it undermines your confidence in your material. I mean, I think it's always implied that somebody's willing to be workable. That's being professional.
Like it or not, it's a working title. In this business, you won't necessarily have the final approval. You'll have consultation. So from my point of view,
You're saying in the reality of the business, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a given, so you don't need to say it. Yeah, good.
I'm assuming it's for adults, unless you tell me it's for young adults. And
It is for adults. I
So
mean,
I'd be curious to hear, I think you should have identified the age group. Again, I just want to mind around the specifics. Some of it is just to identify whether I'm the real candidate for it. And also, I think that most pitches won't allow you to read from the text to that degree. So it really is about a thumbnail description of the work that's so specific and evocative that we get it without you having read it. You won't really have the benefit of reading from the text in most cases.
Thank you. And I wonder if the audience is extrapolating stories or leads or ideas. I hope you're not all just sitting there waiting for your own pitch to come along.
Short, but I brought the visual. I don't know if everyone can see it or not. I'll hold it up here. So I'm Tiffany. This is my project, and I want you to meet the Dudleys, the little pigeons here. They're a family of pigeons who made their home on a wooden plank below my bathroom window, and they moved in just as my husband was moving out. So my project is called The Dudleys and Me, a picture book for adults about life, love, and a family of New York City pigeons. And I'm just going to put this down for this. Great. So the project is kind of a whimsical art therapeutic take on the divorce memoir. It's comprised of 7 stories about divorce, new motherhood, and dating in just that order. It's 7 weeks of the pigeon's life cycle, from mating to eggs hatching. They're mirrored by 7 years of my non-linear parallel experiences. Pigeons mate for life, so I very curiously observed how they went about their family business as my own was deteriorating and radically shifting. So the stories are driven by original collages, hence the visuals, and supported by impressionistic prose. I designed the book as an 8x10, 75-page work that I consider more an object of art than a strictly literary piece. I see it on the shelves of Anthropology as much as I do Barnes & Noble. And I think it can appeal to a diverse audience, from parents and divorcees to artistically minded readers who are interested in an emotionally and visually fulfilling experience. I'm a published professor at Parsons New School for Design, and also an artist whose collages are exhibited through the AIR Gallery in Brooklyn. And collage is my preferred medium. It's all about deconstructing and reconstructing and using disparate yet very meaningful source materials, from postcards and paste to headaches and heartbreak, to create something new and fresh. And for me, it very much parallels what one has to do when you have to rebuild your life after a traumatic experience. And so for me, the takeaway from the book is that our personal pain can be transmuted into a beautiful thing. So thank you.
At one point, you talked about having a craft element, or no?
Yes, I keep going back and forth about this. I had thought about having actually even materials at the end of the book where you can make your own collage, or having a second book component that would be more focused to children and teaching them how, as an art therapy, of how to use a painful experience and make art out of it. So I'm kind of thinking of a companion piece, or kind of make an ironic craft book for adults that also tells a very poignant story.
I saw this and I just instantly loved it. I really did. I love the picture. It's so appealing. I like the way you're doing everything that we've been telling the others to do. You're describing it. You're describing the genre. It's a picture book, but it's for adults. And I love the title. The pacing of it is beautiful. It really, really works. I would strongly advise you against mentioning either of those projects that you just did, because publishers are terrified about costs and anything that involves something at the end where there's materials and they have to put it together. And I mean, that can come up after we sign the contract. And the only places during this pitch, it's funny because Isabel Gillis is a good friend of mine.
Okay.
And she also went to our school. She was with us. I wouldn't describe her book as charming.
Okay.
It's raw. I mean, it may have charm, but it's brutal. You know, the
Yeah.
second book might be charming.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the right adjective. I think you need to be careful when you're using popular books not to use an adjective that your reader's going to say, what? No, I don't understand that. Doesn't make sense to me. But I did like your mention of Griffin and Sabine.
Which I did not actually say there. I was thinking, I missed that in actually saying that. I think of it as Griffin and Sabine meets Isabel Julius happens every day memoir.
Which is a very,
So-
very raw memoir about her husband cheating. She finds out that her husband's cheating on her, their marriage falls apart. The only phrase that I underlined that I didn't get it, was when you said 7 weeks of the Dudley's life cycle are mirrored by 7 years of my non-linear parallel experiences.
Okay.
No, you don't know what you're talking about.
How they mate? Oh, sorry. Gotcha. Yeah, sorry. I'm like,
I know it's excruciating, but the name of
This is good.
pacing.
This is good.
I do handle memoir, and I appreciate when a particular story resonates universally, and I think this has the potential power to do so. More important, I think that pigeons have been underrepresented in literature. And you might be the answer to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not a publisher, but I'm the person that has the ideas that are too expensive that make the money people want to freak out. But I do think that, I totally sparked when you said that it, make it like kind of an arts and crafts book. And if that is not something that isn't like feasible or smart in a pitch to a publisher, it's something you can create with your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
And just, or your Instagram, or your blog,
Or craft, no, seriously, what about like craft project of the day, or
Exactly.
craft prompt of the day?
And those are the things I think it goes with to everybody who's pitched. Like you just these little nuggets that you can get out as like little samples. That's the beauty of this, of taking advantage of the social media.
Two publishers, if you do want to do craft book, Quirk Books and Chronicle. Those are the two.
I was thinking Chronicle.
And Perigee, Rita?
Let me see it first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, my name is Heather Benoxson-Lewis. I'm an artist and I'm a student researcher at Columbia University. As an artist, I find myself in a constant dialogue with what I want to say, what I think I should say, and what I think should sell. As a researcher, I study art and censorship. Art censorship expert Stephen Dubin cites powerful interest groups and large corporations as being responsible for many instances of art censorship. But what happens when the person doing the censoring is the artist? This is where I begin the quest to find out what is happening in the process of creating work. In order to make fundamental changes in a capitalist society, we must seek out the origins of influence of money and power on our expression and behavior. Being an artist of any sort is a complex web of connections, skills, who you know, timing, and money. I began to realize a while back that I changed what I did, in part, for economic reasons. This doesn't sound out of the ordinary. However, we as an art-consuming public assume that the artist is not censoring their expression at all. I have spoken to numerous artists of a myriad of genres and found that they each have a unique view of how society and economics influence their expression. For example, in an interview with performance artist Jill Sigmund, she describes outside influence like a mix in a DJ track. If it's too loud, you can't hear what your heart is telling you. And if it's too quiet for too long, you probably don't have your finger on the pulse of your audience. In another interview, photographer Sarah Small talks about finding sponsorship without compromising voice. In my book, I highlight a series of New York City-based artists and candidly interview them about their perceptions of social and economic influence on their expression. How do they define self-censorship? How do they self-censor in order to make money or attain recognition? Along with interviews, the book will Along with interviews, the book will lead with full-color images of their work, each artist at work, as well as individual portraits taken by me as a part of my own voice. This coffee table book is a conversation starter, an academic reference, and a spotlight on the expression of the zeitgeist of 2013 New York City artists.
My sense is it's a subject worth mining and very rich, assuming you can get the interviews that give credibility to the subject. And I think there's really the challenge, because it's a tricky subject. Yeah. And I didn't know that it was a book until lower down. In fact, I thought it could have been a piece for a magazine. It wasn't clear which direction you were going in. I'd be curious to know more about your own art in this. Just so I could get a visual, and maybe if you've already started the interviewing process, which would lend further credibility to the effort to name names, because it really is about the people you're interviewing in a book like this.
Name dropping.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you have to tell us who the artists are. Some of them have to be prominent, unfortunately. And I will say another word that strikes terror to publishers is coffee table book. And it's not a genre that agents will I mean, especially as a first book, it's just not. Most coffee table books are written by famous people or about famous people or involve famous people in some way.
Right.
I don't think you need that word. Get rid of
I'm not
that
sure it
phrase.
needs the visuals.
It doesn't. No. And the other thing I'm thinking as I listened to you as a former academic, I thought your pitch was very academic, which I liked. I mean, I think this book is an academic book, actually. And academic presses will pay for books now. They didn't used to. I mean, I sold a book to Yale University Press for $40,000. You know, 10 years ago, Yale University Press paid $0. So I think you want to find an agent who specializes in university presses. But you still are going to need to have some prominent, even if they're not famous to the general public, they're known in the art circles. I think one thing that you need to clarify too is that because you are articulate, it's unclear from what you pitch. Is this a photo dominant project or is this a writing dominant project? And so, you know, there are, I mean, as much as it's true that first books and whatever, but if you're going to do an exhibit, and then, you know, then you're creating your platform, right? Even if they're not famous people, or even if they're like all Lower East Side, at least they're a school or a type of artist, then you could capitalize off of that. Like maybe you're discovering the 21st century artist, but you have to think about how to frame it for other people. And, you know, I know that there's, again, it is the academic press route, but there are places like Princeton University, what's it called, Princeton Architectural Press does very interesting visual books that are gorgeous, and they can be architectural or not. They can have a huge design element. I don't know if they've ever done portraits, but maybe if you did them in an architectural way or had an interesting setting. And the other thing that occurred to me is that Aperture Books does, I mean, and that would be, you know, a big leap, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. And then finally, you know, depending on your career and when I work with my clients, it's like if you want to create your own self-published book, like I know this woman who did this book about photographing women who were incarnations of the various goddesses, and she has now got a Huffington Post blog that's very popular, and she self-published and made this luscious coffee table book. I know a woman who worked for a crazy, wonderful heiress who was obsessed with this weird kind of, literally, I kid you not, Victorian hair jewelry, which photographs very, very graphically in black and white, very beautiful, extraordinary forms. And, you know, they sold the book for $200 a pop, you know, so you can do things like this. So you can make
this should start as a magazine piece. This has to be the tip of the iceberg that inspires the book. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Yeah, you know, getting back to that original point, I wasn't sure which way you were going, but I kind of think that you've got to prove it as a magazine piece first, that that makes the book deserving.
Or journal piece. Yeah. Or maybe even some literary magazines that do photo series.
Liz? I think the subject's too rich for a Twitter post. But I do think that just the concept that you put forth, I think there's a lot of power in this idea of artists censoring themselves. I mean, just right there, I mean, just in terms of conceptually, I mean, that You pretty much did lead with it, but I think that's huge, and that's your hook.